He married a village girl for an inheritance, but she wasn't who he thought. The snow had barely begun to melt in the Alpine valley of St. Luc when Adrian Volkmann returned to his father's estate with a heart full of rebellion and a plan forged in desperation. The sprawling chateau, nestled between mountains like a sleeping lion, had been his childhood prison and would soon become his bargaining chip. He hadn't come home for love or nostalgia. He had come for the inheritance. Adrian, the only son of the iron-willed billionaire Wolfgang Volkmann, had spent most of his adult life avoiding responsibility. He loved the jazz clubs of Paris more than the silent snowfall of Switzerland. He preferred champagne to the Volkmann vineyards and models over mergers. But with his father nearing 80 and threatening to bequeath the entire empire to a distant cousin unless Adrian settled down like a man, the stakes had changed. There was one condition in the will. Adrian had to marry a respectable woman from the region and remain married for a year. Not a fling, not a fiancé, but a wife with roots, reputation, and resilience. The sort of woman Adrian had spent his life avoiding. His lawyer, Ernst, handed him a list of suitable candidates. Daughters of bankers, heiresses of hotel chains, elite bloodlines interwoven with aristocracy. But Adrian tossed the list aside. They were too obvious, too strategic, too polished. He had a different idea. In a small hamlet called Fernode, tucked away in a curve of the Alps only known to hikers and shepherds, Adrian found her. She was fetching water by the frozen spring, wearing an old wool shawl, and humming to herself as if the cold didn't matter. Her name was Leora. Her eyes were the color of polished obsidian, and her voice sounded like the wind slipping through pine needles. She lived with her grandmother, baked bread in a stone oven, and kept chickens. Or so it seemed. Adrian offered her a proposal, literal and transactional. 1 year of marriage, comfort, financial support, and a home for her grandmother in exchange for legitimacy. She stared at him long and hard before agreeing. They were married within 3 weeks. The wedding was modest by Volkmann standards. Adrian told his father that Leora came from humble but noble roots, which wasn't entirely untrue. Wolfgang raised an eyebrow, but with the ink on the marriage certificate still wet, he released the first portion of the inheritance. The estate in Geneva, 3 vineyards, and 20 million euros. Adrian should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt watched. Leora was nothing like he expected. She wasn't intimidated by the chateau's grandeur. She walked its hallways like she belonged there. The staff began to listen to her, then follow her. The head chef asked her opinion on menu selections. The gardener changed the flower layout after a quiet word from her. Even Wolfgang, gruff and skeptical, began inviting her to sit in on family board meetings as an observer. At first, Adrian chalked it up to her charm. But charm couldn't explain what happened next. One evening, at a formal charity ball hosted by the Volkmann Foundation, a reclusive banking magnate from Liechtenstein approached Leora with reverence and called her Baroness. Adrian laughed awkwardly, but Leora smiled and led the Mun into a private room for discussion. When she returned, the foundation had received a mysterious 7-figure donation, anonymously, of course. Adrian began digging. Not through her things, he wouldn't stoop that low, but through old archives, forgotten whispers, and local legends. What he found unsettled him. Leora's grandmother, Mathilde, was once known as the Silent Sister of the Alps, a wartime resistance strategist whose legacy had been buried under classified documents and forgotten files. Her daughter, Leora's mother, had married a powerful but secretive financier from an untraceable Eastern European dynasty. The Mun had vanished after a suspicious plane crash. Leora, it turned out, wasn't just a village girl. She was the living heir to an ancient banking empire that operated entirely in shadows. She didn't need Adrian. She never had. By the 4th month of their marriage, Adrian started seeing signs that she was the one pulling the strings. Not out of ambition, but with quiet precision. She rerouted Volkmann's failing supply chain through alternative ports. She introduced Adrian to a South Korean investor who would triple the wine exports. She gently suggested Wolfgang invest in crypto assets before the boom. And she did it all under the guise of polite dinner conversations. One night, after a particularly opulent gala in Zurich, Adrian asked her directly, "Who are you, Leora?" She looked at him as they stood by the moonlit balcony, the air crisp with winter's breath. "I'm your wife," she said simply, "and the granddaughter of a woman who taught me to survive before I could walk." "But why marry me?" She tilted her head. "Because you needed me, and I needed the Volkmann name. Not for money, for legacy. My family's empire is silent, invisible, but yours is loud. And sometimes, the world needs to be reminded of what power truly looks like." That night, Adrian didn't sleep. For the first time, he realized that he might be the one who had been chosen, not the other way around. As spring bloomed in the Alps and their marriage crossed the half-year mark, things changed between them. Adrian, no longer trying to impress anyone, began to watch Leora with new eyes. She spoke 6 languages fluently, made perfect espresso, and once single-handedly negotiated the release of a seized cargo in Nigeria by calling a diplomat she'd once tutored in Vienna. She wore no jewelry, but when she did, it was heirloom quality. And the villagers of Fernode? They still whispered her name like a prayer. Adrian began falling in love, not the lustful, fleeting kind he was used to, but a slow, humbling affection. He stopped attending meaningless parties. He started learning the family business, not to impress his father, but to build something lasting. And he started protecting Leora, even if she didn't need protecting. When the 1-year mark approached, Wolfgang Volkmann called his son into his private study and handed him the final clause of the will. "You've fulfilled your duty," Wolfgang said. "The remainder of the inheritance is yours, including the majority shares." Adrian looked at the papers. He could sign and be free. But instead, he walked out of the room and found Leora tending to her herb garden on the terrace. "I don't want the shares," he said. She glanced up. "Then why did you marry me?" He hesitated. "Because I was stupid, arrogant. I thought I could buy my way into respect. But you taught me something different. You married me for power, but you gave me purpose. I want to be worthy of this family. Of you." Leora stood up. The wind tugged gently at her silk scarf. "You are worthy, Adrian, but you've only just begun." The media never learned the full story of Leora Volkmann. All they saw was a stunning transformation. The once reckless heir now a brilliant strategist with a powerful wife by his side. They were nicknamed the Ice Couple for their cool composure and alpine roots. But beneath the headlines, Adrian knew the truth. She hadn't just saved the Volkmann Empire. She had redefined it. And as the snow returned to the peaks a year later, Adrian knelt in the same village where they had met, pulled out a small velvet box, and asked her to marry him again. This time, not for business. For love. She said yes. But she also warned him. This time, Adrian, there will be no contracts. No conditions. Just truth. He smiled. "Then I will spend my life earning it." And so they did, together. 2 empires woven into one legacy. Not forged in greed, but reborn in respect, mystery, and an unforgettable alpine love story.